Hi, it's Wyndham. Why is it so difficult to take action? Even when we know that something has to change and that the change we want isn't going to happen unless we take action. Why is it, even in the face of all of that, it is so difficult to take the steps we need to take? I was chatting to a client last week and this came up. I think I know what I should do, and yet I always have a problem with should. I think I know what I would benefit from doing, and yet I'm finding it incredibly difficult to take the action. So I thought I would talk you through, from a blueprint philosophy perspective, what I have come to understand about why these things are so hard. I spent 20 years not actively making decisions and taking action that would propel me towards what I really wanted. And there were lots of things around, I hadn't figured out what I really wanted. I only knew what I wanted to take away, and taking away what we don't want doesn't give us what we do want. So that's a problem. But more specifically, with regard to why taking action is so hard, I came to a number of conclusions. And I want to talk you through them so that when this happens to you, and it will, of course it will, it happens to all of us, you can be a little bit better prepared so that you understand what's actually going on, rather than just this amorphous, emotion-filled paralysis, which can often overwhelm us. So there's a few things I would like to explain and for you to take away. Number one, first and foremost, every decision you have ever made sense on some level at the time you made it. Right? I personally spent a huge amount of time berating and criticizing myself because of past decisions. The reality of it was those decisions were made such a long time ago, I can no longer remember all of the nuanced reasons that made it make sense. And now I'm stuck with outcomes that I don't want. And I'm blaming myself because of decisions I made years ago. First and foremost, every decision ever made sense at some level. Okay. Second thing to recognize, and this was a big one for me when it happened, when I had this moment of insight, is every decision we make is primarily motivated by one of two things. Either that decision insulates us from something, or it exposes us to something. That's it. Now, a single decision can both insulate and expose, but there is always a primary motivator. Are we trying to insulate us, protect ourselves from something, or actually are we looking to expose ourselves to something new? So every decision makes sense. Every decision is primarily motivated either by a sense of protection, insulation, or adventure, exposure to something new. And then the third blueprint truth that really helped me understand all of this was every decision has two types of outcome. There's the intended outcome and unintended outcome, both of which have consequences attached to them. So what do I mean by that? Relatively self-explanatory, but I think for many of us, and I 100% include myself in this, I was not really intentional about the outcomes I was trying to achieve. Right? I went back earlier to say every decision we ever made sense. Well, how clear are we genuinely about what we are trying to create? Again, taking away what we don't want does not give us what we do want. And if we are focused on less of, removing things we don't want, then we just create a vacuum. And we can achieve that, but then what pours into the vacuum? Unintended consequences. So for me, those 3 blueprint truths, when I finally figured them out, they make like this perfect triangle around every... That wasn't a triangle. What's a triangle? There we go. They make this perfect container for all of our decisions. And when I could bring my awareness to the fact that that is what is happening and accept it, accept the fact there is nothing I can do about that. That is just the nature of the universe we live in. That is the nature of change. Once I could accept that, then it helped create some stability. Even though, paradoxically, the stability I was creating was uncertainty. Because I could get to a point where not knowing what the outcome was going to be in its entirety was okay, because, well, that's just the way it is. You know, it's like throwing something in the air and hoping it doesn't come back down. It's not the way things are. So let me run you through those again. Recognize that every decision you ever make made sense to you at the time you made it. And the conditions around making that decision were primarily motivated by one of 2 things. You were either insulating yourself from something, a protection, or you were exposing yourself to something. When we look at it, which of those is easier to do? Which of those decisions is easier to take? I'm going to take a bold, exposing decision that puts me into a place of uncertainty. Or I'm going to play it safe. I'm just going to protect myself. I'm just going to see how this plays out. I know from my perspective, I was insulating myself for decades. I knew I wanted to be brave. I knew I wanted to be bold and step into this new adventure, create something new. But I was terrified. I had this huge list of things I didn't want to happen and that I didn't feel capable to deal with if they did. So I did nothing. Primary motivator, insulation. And then we come to the third one, the type of outcomes we create, the consequences of our decisions. If I take my decisions based on insulation, I can sit there and go, well, none of those embarrassing things happened. I didn't fail. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. Thumbs up. I have achieved my intended outcomes. I've protected myself from the stories I've told myself are going to happen. And the unintended outcome, the unintended consequence, was I stayed where I was. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the unavoidable, unintended consequences of acting and choosing in the way that I had to insulate myself. It meant that, no, I wasn't exposed to dangerous new things. I was guaranteed to remain exposed to the existing things I didn't want. And there will always be that. There will always be the intended outcome. There will always be the unintended. So what do we do about all of this? First and foremost, I believe it is imperative that we get clear, crystal clear, on what we are trying to create. Actively, what are we trying to bring about in our lives? How clear can we be? How clearly defined can that be? And that, by the way, does not have to be all mechanism. I speak about mechanism and meaning all the time. This is being clear about the meaning we are trying to create. What is the sense of being I want in my life? Then we can go and look in search of all the various mechanisms that can help us create that. Then we come to, am I ready to expose or insulate? When I am afraid of making a decision, I've got my clear idea of what it is I really want to create. What is stopping me doing it? Almost certainly, it's going to be the fears, that little voice in the back of our head is whispering to us about how badly it's going to go, how much judgment we're going to incur, how bad we're going to feel when we muck it up. And by the way, you know what? Voice says you're going to muck it up. So the primary motivation in that sense becomes insulation. But insulation is never going to get us where we want to go. It's just not. It's just going to maintain what we already have. And I promise you, maintenance doesn't happen. It's a gradual degradation of what we have. It will get worse. Sorry, another truth. But if we can recognize these things as this is just what's going to happen, then we get to deal with what is rather than what we would like it to be. We get to create it. And then we get to look at, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to make a decision that exposes me to the new, the exciting, the dangerous, as my mind would have me think. Because I know the intended outcome I am trying to achieve, and I can stand by it because I've spent the time looking inwards to figure out what it is I'm trying to create. I understand where I want to go, and I understand why. And I understand that it is all aligned with who I truly want to be. When we can do that, then the unavoidable, unintended consequences that come as a result, that just becomes another choice, another decision we can make to rectify it, if we can, to mitigate it, if we can. And if we can't do either of those things, can we find a way to accept it? Because we've been clear on what we are trying to create. We've been bold. We have chosen to expose ourselves to uncertainty. We have been clear about the intended outcomes we are trying to achieve. And the vast majority of people in this world are good and decent and honest. Their intention is not to hurt other people. So if we can tick all of those boxes in our heads, we've been clear about what we're trying to create. We understand we are worthy of the life we really want. We've recognized that it's going to take a bold, exposing choice, a decision that puts us into uncertainty. We've been clear about the intended outcome, and our intention was never to hurt anybody, even if the unintended consequence is that somebody does get hurt. We can then address that confidently, knowing that we have been true to ourselves. Authenticity, integrity, massive pillars of a life that is meaningful. We can look at all of the outcomes, both intended and unintended. We can look at those outcomes and be confident that we can apply the same process to dealing with those unintended outcomes as we did in creating the life we really want, because of the intended outcomes we were clear about. I'll leave you with that. Where in your life are you prioritizing insulation, protection, over bold exposure to new? Where are you settling for predictably shit as opposed to potentially incredible? There is risk in all of this, and there's no judgment. The blueprint philosophy does not do judgment. It's all compassion, because every decision you've ever made and you ever make in the future makes sense on some level. If it makes sense, where's the judgment? It might make sense and it might not be serving you. So can you bring your awareness to those three truths? It always makes sense on some level. It either exposes or insulates you, and there are always two types of outcome, the intended and the unintended. And if you can make your decisions with integrity and responsibility, authenticity, and a sense of self-love, whatever the unintended outcomes are, whatever those consequences are, you can deal with them one way or another. I leave you with that. I wish you a peaceful and joyful few days, and I will speak to you soon.